On February 28, 2026, the world woke up to a dramatically altered geopolitical landscape. Joint military strikes by the United States and Israel targeted key locations within Iran, resulting in the death of the nation's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. This single event set off a chain reaction, a cascade of consequences that would ripple across the globe, touching every economy, touching every household. The immediate response from Tehran was swift and severe. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued stark warnings. They declared any and all vessel passage through the Strait of Hormuz was prohibited, plunging the international community into profound uncertainty. The warnings were not mere rhetoric. Just 2 days later, on March 2, 2026, a senior IRGC official declared the strait closed to all traffic. This was not a blockade in the traditional sense, but something far more menacing. Any ship attempting to navigate the narrow waterway would be considered a legitimate target for military action. This declaration drew a red line in the Persian Gulf few shipowners or captains would dare to cross. The world held its breath, waiting to see how this would play out on the global stage. The impact on maritime traffic was almost instantaneous before closure. Over 150 massive oil tankers, other commercial vessels, were already anchoring outside the strait. Following the IRGC's confirmation, tanker traffic plummeted by an astounding 70%. Within days, the flow of ships through this vital choke point had dwindled to virtually zero. The strait, normally bustling with the lifeblood of the global economy, fell eerily silent. This paralysis was not just a logistical problem, it was a clear and present danger to the world's energy supply, a system built on the assumption of free and open maritime passage. The IRGC's rhetoric intensified the crisis. Warning: expect oil at $200 per barrel. From Iran's perspective, the price of oil was now directly linked to the security of the region Tehran felt under direct assault. The IRGC declared it would not allow a liter of oil to pass, naming any vessel tied to the United States, Israel, their allies, as potential targets. This created a new and dangerous reality. Commercial shipping was on the front line of a rapidly escalating international conflict. To understand the magnitude of this crisis, one must first grasp the singular importance of the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow channel of water connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. It is arguably the most important energy choke point on the planet. Its geography dictates its strategic value. At its narrowest point, the shipping lane is only a few miles wide. That makes it relatively easy to control or disrupt. For decades, the global economy has relied on the uninterrupted flow of energy through this passage. The closure, therefore, is not just a regional issue. It's a direct threat to the functioning of modern industrial society. The numbers alone are staggering. Approximately 20 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. This is about 1/5 of the world's daily oil consumption. It cannot be easily replaced or rerouted. The disruption is estimated to be twice as large as the Suez Crisis supply shock of 1956-57. The world faces a supply disruption with no modern precedent. The impact extends far beyond crude oil. LNG. The strait is a critical corridor for LNG. Much of the world's LNG supply originates in the Persian Gulf, primarily Qatar. Nearly all of Qatar's LNG exports, roughly 20% of the global market, must transit the strait. The halt means both oil and natural gas supplies face severe contraction. This creates a dual energy crisis that will hit electricity prices and industry. The closure divides producers and consumers. Most crude oil and LNG through Hormuz is destined for Asia: China, India, Japan, South Korea. These countries built their economies on reliable Middle East energy imports. Now, with the strait closed, they must scramble for alternatives and confront fragile energy security. To truly comprehend the crisis unfolding in early 2026, we must start with basic geography. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow strip of sea separating Iran from the Arabian Peninsula. narrow strait between Iran and Oman. It is the only sea passage from the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. At its narrowest point, the shipping lane is just 2 miles wide in each direction, flanked by the territorial waters of Iran, flanked by the territorial waters of Oman. This geographical constraint is what makes it a choke point. For decades, this slender waterway has served as the main artery for Middle Eastern energy exports, a superhighway for the supertankers that fuel the modern world. Its closure transforms a simple fact of geography into a profound global vulnerability, turning a map location into the epicenter of an economic earthquake. The main exporters relying on this passage are the giants of the oil world: Saudi Arabia, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq. These nations are members of OPEC, and their collective output represents a massive share of the global supply. For them, the strait is not just a route. It is their primary gateway to international markets. Without it, millions of barrels of oil are effectively stranded, locked behind a closed door with no immediate alternative exit. The economies of these nations are built on oil revenue. The inability to ship their primary product creates an existential crisis for them as much as it does for consumers. On the other side of the equation are the importers, the nations whose economies are powered by this constant flow of energy. The vast majority of oil transiting Hormuz is destined for Asia. China, India, Japan, South Korea. Together, these 4 nations alone receive nearly 70% of the crude oil that passes through the strait. For them, the closure is a direct threat to their economic stability and energy security. Factories, transportation systems, power grids, forcing them into a desperate search for alternatives that simply may not exist in sufficient quantity. This dependency creates a complex web of geopolitical and economic relationships, all of which are now under extreme stress. The relationship between producer and consumer is built on a foundation of trust and the principle of free navigation. Iran's actions have shattered that foundation. The closure is a direct challenge to the international order that has governed maritime trade for centuries. It forces every nation to reevaluate its energy policies. It forces every nation to reevaluate its alliances. It forces every nation to reevaluate its exposure to distant conflicts. The geography of the Strait of Hormuz, a simple line on a map, has become the fault line for a global crisis, demonstrating how interconnected and fragile our globalized world truly is when a single point of failure is triggered. The numbers associated with the Strait of Hormuz are difficult to overstate. Every day before the closure, an average of 20 million barrels of crude oil and petroleum products pass through this waterway. To put that into perspective, global daily oil consumption hovers around 100 million barrels. This means the strait handles roughly 1/5, 20%, of the world's daily supply. This is not a marginal amount. It is a torrent of energy, the equivalent of the entire daily production of the United States and the daily production of Canada. Suddenly removing this volume is like trying to run a marathon after losing 1/5 of your blood supply. The system is thrown into immediate severe shock. The historical context makes this even more alarming. The world has faced oil shocks before, but none this large. The Suez Crisis of 1956-57 shut another choke point and disrupted about 10% of supply. The 1973 oil embargo cut roughly 7%. Hormuz's disruption is at least twice as large as Suez. We are in uncharted territory. The global energy system has never seen a sudden loss of this scale. Strategic reserves built over decades are now being put to their ultimate test against a shortfall they weren't designed to handle long term. This supply cut immediately and dramatically affects prices. Even before closure, Brent crude, the international benchmark, had surged from about $80 per barrel at the start of 2026 to over $119. That's nearly a 50% rise in months, driven by geopolitical tension. The IRGC's 200 per barrel warning is now a real possibility. Oil prices are set by supply and demand. With 20% of supply vaporized, prices must rise enough to destroy demand and rebalance the market, a painful process for the global economy. Shipping reacted immediately. Even before Iran's announcement, tanker traffic began to halt. Ship owners and charterers refused to risk multi-hundred-million-dollar assets in their crews. The Persian Gulf became a parking lot, over 150 tankers anchored outside the strait. This self-imposed blockade sent a powerful signal. Iran's physical closure became almost formal. The market had already decided the transit risk was too high. The flow of 20 million barrels per day had effectively stopped. Section 3. The LNG lifeline snaps. The crisis extends well beyond oil. The Strait of Hormuz is also an indispensable corridor for liquefied natural gas, or LNG. Globally, about 20% of all LNG trade passes through this choke point, the overwhelming majority of this volume. Nearly all of it, in fact, originates from one country, Qatar. Qatar has built its economy on its massive natural gas reserves, becoming the world's leading LNG exporter. Its state-of-the-art liquefaction facilities in Ras Laffan Industrial City are marvels of modern engineering, designed to cool natural gas to minus 162 degrees Celsius, minus 260 Fahrenheit, so it can be shipped efficiently around the world. But all of that production is predicated on one simple assumption: access to the sea via the Strait of Hormuz. The impact of the closure on LNG markets was instantaneous and severe, perhaps even more so than in oil markets. Following the strikes on its facilities and the closure of the strait, QatarEnergy was forced to halt production at its main plants. This decision effectively removed a fifth of the world's traded LNG supply from the market overnight. European natural gas futures, which are highly sensitive to LNG supply disruptions, immediately jumped by 30%. For countries that rely on LNG for heating in the winter and for power generation year-round, this is a catastrophic development. The halt in Qatari production means that a major pillar of global gas security has crumbled, with no other producer capable of ramping up output quickly enough to fill such a massive gap. The ripple effects were felt immediately in the shipping market for LNG. The daily freight rates for specialized LNG carriers, which are expensive and limited in number, surged by over 40%. This reflects a market in panic, as charterers scrambled to secure any available vessel, to find alternative supply routes, or simply to store gas. For many nations, particularly in Asia, the Qatari supply line is nothing short of essential. Pakistan, for instance, relies on Qatar and the UAE for 99% of its LNG imports. Bangladesh receives 72% of its LNG from these two Gulf nations. India gets over half. For these developing economies, the shutdown is not just an inconvenience. It threatens blackouts and industrial collapse. This LNG disruption exposes a different facet of energy insecurity. Unlike the oil market, which is more global and fungible, the LNG market is tighter, with less liquidity and flexibility. Long-term contracts tie specific suppliers to specific buyers, and the infrastructure, liquefaction plants, specialized tankers, and regasification terminals is incredibly capital-intensive and takes years to build. The sudden loss of Qatar as a supplier cannot be easily mitigated. It forces a brutal competition for the remaining available LNG cargoes on the spot market, pitting wealthy European nations against developing Asian countries in a bidding war that the latter are destined to lose, with devastating consequences for their populations. Section 4. A cascade of risk. The physical closure of the strait by Iran was only one part of the mechanism that brought traffic to a halt. An equally powerful, though less visible force was at play: the global insurance market. Every commercial vessel, from a small cargo ship to a very large crude carrier, is covered by multiple layers of insurance. This includes hull and machinery insurance, which covers the value of the ship itself. Protection and indemnity insurance covers liabilities like cargo damage, crew injury, pollution. Without this coverage, No reputable shipowner will allow their vessel to sail, as the financial risk of a single incident would be ruinous. This insurance market is the bedrock of maritime commerce. In response to the escalating military actions, the insurance industry reacted decisively. Underwriters who provide war risk insurance, a special type of coverage for voyages through dangerous areas, began dramatically increasing their premiums. For a transit through the Strait of Hormuz, the premium jumped from about 0.125% of the ship's value to as high as 0.4%. For a very large crude carrier valued at over $100 million, this meant the cost for a single trip through the strait increased by $250,000. This added cost alone was enough to make some voyages unprofitable, but it was the next step that proved to be the final nail in the coffin for commercial traffic. On March 5, 2026, the major protection and indemnity clubs, mutual insurance associations that cover the majority of the world's shipping fleet, took the unprecedented step of withdrawing coverage entirely for any vessel transiting the strait. This was a clear signal that the risk was no longer calculable or commercially bearable. A P&I withdrawal meant that a shipowner would be personally exposed to unlimited liability in the event of an attack, an oil spill, or any other catastrophe. No responsible company would take such a gamble. The decision by insurers effectively did the work of a physical blockade. It created a financial red line that was just as impassable as a military one. This insurance crisis demonstrates how interconnected the modern global economy is. The actions of a military force in the Persian Gulf can trigger an immediate reaction in the quiet offices of insurance underwriters in London, which in turn paralyzes the movement of goods worldwide. The outcome for the flow of oil and other cargo is exactly the same as if every ship were physically stopped by a naval blockade. This cascade of risk, from military to financial to logistical, shows that the Strait of Hormuz is not just a physical choke point, but also a financial one. The withdrawal of insurance made the strait a no-go zone, effectively shutting down 20% of the world's oil supply without a single additional shot being fired at a commercial vessel.